Thank you all for being here today. Let me first thank Olivier for this interesting keynote speech, which ended a series of speeches. I'm the last speaker of the day, so the only thing that stands between you and the lunch reception, so I don't want to make it too long. But on behalf of UBS and also on behalf of Urs Rohner, who had to fly back early as chairman of Credit Suisse, both of us board members of the Swiss Finance Council, we want to thank you for coming to the conference again today. I would like to start with a few remarks, and I've taken some notes, so it's a bit unstructured, but I'll try and work over it when I go back. Many interesting discussions, many interesting views voiced here. I think what I took away from the two panels was, and I think it's also in the paper here, that clearly digitalization to a large extent is driven by our clients, and this will be very important for shaping the way where we all will go. From a bank's perspective, digitalization poses a sizable challenge, but like every challenge, it also opens huge opportunities. And if you're in the leadership of a bank, you need to make it a habit to look at the opportunities whilst at the same time facing the challenges. From a macroeconomic perspective, I think digitalization will improve welfare, it will improve economic growth, it will improve well-being if managed well. And that's a big if, because we heard from the first panel that consumer protection and the whole area of cybersecurity and digital safety is going to be a key downside that needs to be managed well in order to benefit from the upside. The developments we've seen, in my view, are nothing against, and Urs indicated that, to what is likely to come. Regulators, and I want to start with that, but I don't want to end with the regulators. Like Olivier said, we shouldn't look for the regulators always for the solutions. They're part of the landscape that we need to navigate, an important part, but they play a key role, but they're not the only players. The regulators looking at this take various approaches. You saw that on the first panel when Jean-Paul and Mark were talking about the different approach in Belgium, where I sense some more conservative approach still. But again, you know, it needs to be coordinated between 28 member countries and Switzerland, or for that, Hong Kong, Singapore, or the MAS at the forefront of driving some of these changes, much more open to new developments and see that as a chance. And from what Olivier said, having been in South Africa, many of these new economies don't have an established system now, so they're leapfrogging into the new system and they're making good use of that. And in Singapore, it's a key driver of their drive to grow as a financial center and to really catch up with the Londons, the New Yorks, and the Zurichs of this world. So very different strategy. And what we ask for is level playing field. We need coordinated efforts to regulate new technology. Let me just remind you that digital technology is global by definition. And so you cannot bank on digital if you are not global by definition as well. And probably the two Swiss banks, more than many domestic banks you might know from the EU, the share of our home market in what we do globally is much smaller by definition in our overall objective. We have 60,000 people for my bank globally. 20,000 of those are in Switzerland, 20,000 in the US, and the rest is in the rest of the globe. So you need to be global, and when you go digital, you need to go digital global with the same effort and with the same systems. You adapt them to clients, because if it's client-driven, Asian clients have different demands than European clients or US clients, but the technology underlying that, the single platforms that we're developing, we're trying to do that globally. And that's, I think, a key driver for where the journey will take us. Digitalization, in my view, is a genuine chance for reestablishing also the collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, because after the financial crisis, and I've been on the other side of the table then, that collaboration broke down, and the public sector very much took charge in stabilizing the system and moving the system back to normality. Now that we're getting out 10 years after the crisis from crisis mode and move more to normality, it is important to reestablish a modus operandi between the private sector and the public sector that is based on also on a new trust between both sides in each other. We support level playing field regulation and sandboxes, we talked about that, but sandboxes, again, are designed totally different. If it's startups trying to develop products in collaboration with clients, this is something great to do, but, you know, again, Mark mentioned it, some sandboxes are regulated by those that go into the sandbox, and others are regulated by not looking at that, but by looking at size of when you actually need to exit the sandbox and when you become professional. Very different approaches. We're seeing it because we're busy in all of the various locations where these different approaches are being implemented, but it's a key opportunity for us to move further. Now, the EU, I think there are a number of things that we would like to see develop. The first is a fully digital internal market. Let me remind you, in the vein of what Olivier talked about when we come from legacy systems, when Europe talked about a banking union, it talked about breaking down national supervisory and other barriers to banking, which were no longer adequate in an integrated market. When we talk about capital market union, it is largely tearing down what is known as the Giovannini barriers for many 20 years, internal barriers and elimination of that. As a Swiss bank, and this is somebody who knows Europe pretty well because I've been working for European institutions for many years, but I look at Europe from the outside, sometimes when you break down these internal barriers, you get too focused on the internal dynamics, and you actually forget that you need to create an open capital market union that is not just characterized by no borders of capital flows within the union or institutional barriers, but it also needs to be open to the outside, because if Europe wants to grow and raise capital for growth, it cannot do that simply by eliminating internal barriers. It has to open up for global capital, and only with global capital flows Europe can move forward. And that is not just true in the analog world, it is true in the digital world even more. So Europe needs to leapfrog and start in a new, totally integrated digital market from the start. Legal certainty. Legal certainty, because legal systems are still national, needs to develop not just at the European level, but at the global level. We need to know how to use big data as banks. We need to know what the standards are that govern client data protection. We need to know what the standards are that govern online access of credit and creditworthiness judgment. We need to know all these things before we actually evolve in them and then find jurisdictional problems by meeting some rules somewhere but not some rules somewhere else. So we need global standards in this digital world pretty much from the start. Now, I'd also like to say that digital is not a panacea. Many people look at that as the one thing that is supposed to solve all the problems in banking. I don't think it will. So let me, on behalf of Urs, also give you a number of points that he thought are important of what needs to happen in addition to the banks doing their job and developing and innovating, to innovators coming from the outside and forcing us to keep up the speed and work with them rather than work against them. Now, when you look ahead, there's many more things in society that need to change. First, we need to talk about a global ecosystem in digital, where Switzerland is a financial center that is trying to develop that, but there has to be much more active global dialogue on how to develop digital. And it's not just what we can do as banks in our home yard. It really goes beyond the banking needs and the banking skills to technical skills in general. If you look at educational systems, they're not really yet on teaching agendas that involve a large part of digital. Our schools are pretty unchanged to where they were from 20, 30 years ago before digital hit time. There's specialized schools that focus on that, but we need to really work over education systems and make digital and digital syllabuses part of teaching very, very early on. We need to also look at what needs to be done to develop digital capabilities in various areas. Switzerland has, like Germany or Austria, a vocational system where basically people, in addition to learning at university and being at school, get exposed to job experience. And that job experience for most of these young people is digital. And therefore, I think if you have such systems where you bring people both into the intellectual but also into the day-to-day work for work, and they get much better prepared for lifetime jobs, because lifetime jobs are no longer secured by what you learn in school and what you study. it's constant lifetime learning, and digital learning is a much higher challenge because it basically needs much different skills in technology, in mathematics, and engineering than what is taught in traditional systems. So we need to overhaul really the entire educational system. And finally, we need to overhaul, and Commissar Oettinger has been very vocal about that, we need to overhaul the infrastructure. Digital infrastructure, a comprehensive broadband network, for example, is going to be absolutely key. And we need to, in that area, also tear down national barriers. Whenever I've been meeting Commissioner Oettinger, he was talking about the European broadband network, and we're seeing some first developments there, for example, with roaming charges disappearing, and networks need to be integrated. So again, a lot of infrastructure work outside banking and finance that needs to be done for this all to come together. So I'm pretty sure, as Judith was gathering us here for the third time for this conference here, we'll have a good conference next year, and digital will probably play some role in that. So let me conclude and say a few thanks as well. First, I'd really like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. First, to say technology and digitalization is not a panacea. It takes a lot more to move to a new world. Second, digitalization is here to stay, and no institution can afford to ignore it. Even if they do, they're more doomed to fail than those that adapt early. Disruption in our business model is a day-to-day. My philosophy to disruption is, if you can't beat them, join them. So we work very collaboratively with many of the disruptors, and we're trying to bring the bank forward, and so does Credit Suisse. I know that from Morris. Understanding tomorrow's clients and what they expect from us is key, and collaborating in the industry and with the regulators for getting there under success is going to be a defining moment for Europe. So more work to do, probably more interesting insights to come. Maybe we should invite a few more of the disruptors also to the panels, which might create also some bigger discussion. And like at any good conference, I want to close in thanking, first of all, Judith and Alexis for putting this all together. It's been a great effort, and it's a great achievement, again, this third conference. Let me also thank the staff of the Swiss Finance Council here in Brussels for keeping us abreast with developments in Brussels on a monthly basis, on a continuous basis. I think it's money well spent that we from Switzerland have by having a new approach to how we work in Brussels. Switzerland and us as banks used to take note of what was decided in Brussels and try and look at adapting it into Swiss regulation and into how we operate. Now we try and be out there and understand what is happening before it happens so that we can help shape it and actually be prepared to look at how can we provide a level playing field, not just looking at the European rules, but seeing how our rules need to develop in connection to this. The staff did a great job in organizing this conference, and let me close by also thanking all of you, the speakers, those that participated in the conference, for keeping us close to your heart, for coming to our conferences, for being interested in Switzerland and Swiss financial institutions and the problems and the suggestions that we have for this. Let me hope that we will have a good networking lunch, which I think is opened and ready out there. And let me promise you we'll be back next year, and looking forward to seeing you all again next year. Thank you.